Directed and co-written by Stephen Lamort. We are talking Screamboat. And this one features David Howard Thornton, who you may know from the Terrifier movies as Art the Clown, and Tyler Posey in a small role, who you may know from the Teen Wolf TV series. Now, this is one of many public domain horror movies that we've seen in the last few years. So this one's actually an American. They do actually tend to come from the UK mostly, even though sometimes they are pretending to be American. But this one is an American release. And obviously it is about the Mickey Mouse character, which entered the public domain recently. And this one is, I believe, the fourth out of the kind of the current crop of Mickey Mouse horror movies that have been released. And I think this one is probably the most ambitious out of the four released so far. Possibly this is why it's come out the latest, because it maybe had the most going on in regards to production. So what's the story? It focuses on the Staten Island ferry. And one night, it's a foggy night, the last ferry, and we have a few different kind of passengers on this boat. But this mutant rat or mouse is also on this boat, and he is out for blood. He has other motivations as well, which will come through the movie, but he terrorizes the passengers of this boat, whittling them down in gory fashion. What will happen, you'll have to watch the movie and find out. So let's talk about it. So unlike the majority of these kind of public domain horror movies, this is actually a creature feature rather than a slasher, because the antagonist, our Steamboat Willie, Mickey Mouse kind of antagonist, he's not actually human. He is actually a mutant creature, unlike the majority of these type of things where it's just, you know, a human wearing a mask or something like that. So yeah, it's kind of more of a creature feature. Let's talk about what I think works in this movie's favour. So you have a little bit more cachet in regard to some of the names here, as I've mentioned. David Howard Thornton obviously got quite the kind of the cult following thanks to the Terrifier movies. Tyler Posey, you know, again has his fans. So there's a couple of more recognisable names on the cast here. And Thornton is obviously he used to be a mime in real life, as far as I'm aware. So he's good at the kind of the physical acting in here, and obviously he was in the Terrifier movies. So, he's very much good in this in regard to the kind of the physicalities and stuff like that. I think the feeling of this being Americana, which was what Disney is all about, I think is much more present in this movie than it is in a lot of these other kind of films that are based on, American properties that have recently kind of got into the public domain. There's a lot of talk about being a New Yorker here and what it means and things like that, and just kind of like nostalgia for Americana in general. And I think that actually adds something to this movie. What I would say this movie also has is a little bit more winks and nods about the kind of the Disney empire and stuff. Not just obviously the fact that we have a kind of a Mickey Mouse sort of style character here, but for example we have a group of kind of drunk party girls which are meant to kind of be a sly take on the Disney princesses. They're all kind of dressed the same, they've all got kind of similar names, their hair, you've got Jasmine, Cindy and all of this. So it's quite fun, and there's other commentary as well, some of which is pretty funny. There's a little bit of commentary on like older people being obsessed with Disney and stuff like that. We even get an animated segment kind of giving you a little bit of backstory where we see kind of a kind of version of Walt Disney himself. So I think there is actually a little bit more kind of thought in regards to tying it into a kind of a kind of satire, if you like, about the kind of the Disney empire itself, which I think some of the other ones, because they wanted to be first, are just like a generic kind of slashers. Then they're more brainless, if that makes sense. This one I think at least has some little kind of wry senses of humour and jokes and kind of a little bit of commentary here and there, which I kind of thought was quite good. It has a high level of kills, this movie. It actually has quite a high body count. And some of the kills are over the top, as you'd probably expect. Somewhat kind of gory, but in that sort of over the top kind of cartoonish way that you've seen in plenty of films at this point. But yeah, there's some sort of fairly sort of gory and sort of inventive deaths, obviously all to do with kind of what you can find potentially on a boat. And let's talk about this boat. Again, this is actually filmed on a decommissioned ferry that's actually owned by members of the SNL cast. So, you know, it has a little bit of authenticity where we're having it is based on Steamboat Willie. So it is the case that we are actually having it on a boat, unlike the kind of, I think the majority of these other kind of like Mickey Mouse movies. So again, it has that little bit of a better location to a large degree, and it looks like authentically like a boat, because it is. And the actual antagonist himself, this Mickey Mouse sort of killer, he's more interesting in the fact that he's not just a human. He's actually a creature. He's about 2 foot high, so he's obviously smaller than a human, bigger than an actual mouse, but he's probably, if you look at the original sort of Steamboat Willie cartoon, he's more that sort of size in ratio. So it makes for an interesting kind of visual. And he doesn't really look like the Mickey Mouse character as you know him. He's his own thing, although he's kind of wearing the little hat and stuff. But they've kind of leaned more into an original look than the typical kind of Mickey Mouse. Which again, it gives it a little bit of a point of difference here, but he's more a creature, but with a kind of a certain amount of intelligence and things like that. So he is maybe more fun than some of the other kind of like the iterations that you have seen up until this point. There are some kind of fun sort of supporting characters here. There's a kind of a lot of sort of like well, again, commentary on the kind of the kookiness that you might get out of New York and who might be travelling on the last ferry to Staten Island and things like that. And as such, we get some colourful characters, to say the least, not just our Disney princesses, I would say. So yeah, there's some fun to be had here, and the production value is probably more so upped than, again, a lot of these cheapy films that you've come out from the UK who just want to get there first. They're very quickly produced. This one looks like it's had a little bit more effort to put behind it. What doesn't work, I mean, ultimately the story isn't anything too special here. It really just is a bunch of people trapped on a boat and being chased around by a killer. And that's it. There's nothing else to it in regards to kind of story. And because it is all one location, it is all this on this kind of ferry, I think maybe it's a little bit guilty of feeling like rinse and repeat. We've got a various type of humans being chased around by this kind of creature. They get killed, and then we have that again, and then we have that again, and then we have that again. So that's kind of really it. I mean, we have a couple of protagonists that we follow, but I will say, out of all of the characters that we're introduced to, I think our protagonists are the least interesting. They're kind of the most milquetoast sort of generic sort of good guy types out of all of the kind of the characters that we're introduced to, at least the human characters. And I got to say, they're all the least interesting type of people. There's much more interesting characters, I think, that could have been had a little bit more charisma out of some of the supporting characters. Now, I know that these kind of Disney princesses will probably be annoying, and that is the point. They're meant to be like annoying. But I've got to say, I found that this version of the kind of I mean, they're not like dressed as Disney princesses. This is just how they are. They just happen to be. But I kind of found that their kind of superficial characters quite amusing, and how they're sort of just oblivious to the world around them. And I think, again, they had a little bit more interesting things kind of going on, but not just him. I think there's like this tough cop, and you know, he's giving it this big old speech, or the kind of like the you know, the scenes you get in like Independence Day and things like that. And again, there's some kind of fun elements here, and I wish some of these smaller characters' roles had been a little bit expanded, or even kind of upped to one of our main characters. Our main characters, I've got to say, are completely forgettable. Now, the ambition that I've talked about here is obviously to do with the fact that our antagonist, this Mickey Mouse character, is like a 2-foot humanoid mouse. And as such, they've used kind of false perspective, kind of green screen, you know, sort of composite shots and things like this to achieve this. Now, because this is a lower budget movie, the ambition outstrips what this movie can do on a sort of effects level, because the effects do look quite janky, and I don't think probably anyone is going into this movie expecting super realised VFX and, you know, blockbuster level of polish in regard to that. But I do think sometimes the effects look better than others, and sometimes they look downright awful in regards to how they're kind of this Mickey Mouse sort of character is kind of scaled and things like that. And you know, it's obviously kind of, you know, it's things like rear projection and, as I say, blue or green screen, stuff like that. It doesn't look good a lot of the time. So, you know, this movie I think is fine. I think it's a watchable movie if you don't mind the kind of, obviously, the kind of the low budget roughness. I actually think it's probably a little bit more enjoyable in some ways than some of the others. But ultimately, it's not a particularly kind of memorable movie in any way, and I think it has missed some opportunities to make this a little bit more unique and you know, interesting in some respects. But I'll give it a 5 out of 10. It's kind of like an average you know, horror movie, and maybe somewhat of a you know, a better edition of a kind of a public domain killer than we've seen, but still isn't a particularly worthwhile film. So it's a 5 out of 10 for me, kind of an average film overall. Have you seen it? What did you think? Leave me a comment and I'll look forward to seeing you next time. Bye for now.